University of Austin was born in controversy. UATX was accused of all kinds of things. It was accused of one-sided nostalgia, of Straussian indoctrination, of race segregationism, of sexism, and it was called a Bible college for libertarians. Welcome to Heterodox Out Loud. I'm John Tomasi, the president of Heterodox Academy. On every episode, we'll be taking you on an exciting intellectual adventure, a journey across the complex and challenging terrain of open inquiry in higher education. You'll be meeting leading college professors, some heterodox college presidents, and some entrepreneurial students too. Our aim is to give you an insider's view of the complex terrain of open inquiry in higher education, the perils and the possibilities too. So let's get ready for another adventure into heterodoxy. Is it possible to start a great new university in America today? Frederick Rudolph, in his classic history, The American College and University, describes the enthusiasm for college building as, quote, a uniquely American phenomenon. Rudolph especially points to the explosion of new colleges begun in America in the wake of the Civil War. By 1890, for example, as Rudolph Riley puts it, England was managing nicely with 4 universities, while in Ohio alone, there were 40. For Rudolph, this American enthusiasm for new colleges was symbolic of the American belief in progress, the impatience of Americans with the status quo, and the belief in the future of endless possibilities. Today on Heterodox Out Loud, we'll be talking with Pano Kanelos, the president of the University of Austin. So, is it possible to start a great new university in America today? Let's find out. Pano Kanelos, welcome to Heterodox Out Loud.
Thank you for having me, John. I'm very excited to be here and looking forward to our conversation.
And I understand you woke up this morning in Austin at around 4 a.m.
I did. And it had the wrong time for my flight in mind and had a late mad dash to the airport, but I am here and happy to be here.
You would do anything to get to New York to be on Heterodox Out Loud. So we're really happy to have you here. Thank you.
Indeed, sure.
So we're going to talk about the University of Austin. UATX was born in controversy. In November 2021, you wrote a piece on Barry Weiss's Substack announcing your intention to start a new university, you and your colleagues. It was called, "We Can't Wait for Universities to Fix Themselves, so we're starting a new one." Among the things you wrote in that piece were, you said that, quote, on our quads, faculty are being treated like thought criminals. And you said, quote, "We had thought such censoriousness was possible only under oppressive regimes in distant lands, but it turns out that fear can become endemic in a free society, and it's most acute in our universities." And you also said, "At our most prestigious schools, the primary incentive is to function as a finishing school for the national global elite. Amidst the brick and ivy, these students entertain ever more inaccessible theories, while it's often just blocks away their neighbors figure out how to scratch a living." The backlash was strong and predictable, perhaps. Some people who you and I both greatly admire as defenders of free speech, like Bob Zimmer, stepped away. There were a host of articles with titles like "Who's Afraid of Higher Ed?" Is UATX against everyone, including itself? And does America really need a new conservative university? UATX was accused of all kinds of things. It was accused of one-sided nostalgia, of Straussian indoctrination, of race segregationism, of sexism, and it was called a Bible college for libertarians. And yet, during those same early days, there were thousands of parents, students, and professors who reached out to you, applauding what you were doing and expressing hope. And I mentioned this to you as you were just speaking, that last night, when I was preparing for this interview, I went back and I reread Teddy Roosevelt's famous speech about the man in the arena, which he gave at a university, at the Sorbonne, in Paris in 1910. And Roosevelt wrote, "It is not the critic who counts, not the one who points out how the strong man stumbled or how the doer of deeds might have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena. So, is UATX, or are you the man in the arena?
Oh my, what a question to start with. We're in an arena for sure. I mean, we have decided to enter a hotly contested space. Education is really, in many ways, where many of our sort of cultural, where so much of our cultural pressure is kind of, becoming intense right now. And I will say at the beginning, I was surprised by the kind of, let's say, volume of the feedback.
Vitriol, you could add.
Some of it was vitriol. Some of the criticism is fine. I mean, they're like, some of the, is it possible to start a new university today? Right. If we start this new university, are we going to succumb to the same forces that have that we're currently critiquing? That sort of thing. And I think the kind of critical feedback was important. I was just, the volume of interest. I mean, we were in the first 48 hours, I think, after that article came out, we were the #1 news story on Twitter in the world.
Right.
And it was just, all we said is we're starting a new university.
Yeah.
And yes, we didn't say
Remarkable. Remarkable.
And that just, I think, speaks to the intensity around these issues. And so it very much felt like we were being thrust into an arena. Since then, we've been building a university and doing it in a way that, putting in the hard work to take all the steps to make sure that we're building a university and that aligns with the principles that we have, that is in alignment with the values of our sort of core members and our supporters. It's been a learning process. It's been intense. It's been a joy. It's been a frustration. But we've come a long way. I mean, we're 2 years into this project, and we are, on the verge of bringing in our first class of freshmen.
I'm very excited to hear about the progress and what's next for you. Let me knuckle back to the very beginning. We've already been there a moment ago, but just help us get a better picture of what success would like for UATX. And this is one way I might put that question. Do you see the central aim? This is New York, you can hear the sirens. Is the aim to build one great free-thinking college? Or is the aim in some sense to change the university system as a whole?
Well, I don't think those are separable. I think to change things, you have to build things. So, one of the things I say often is, we live in a world where it feels like everything's falling apart. People are dividing themselves, polarization, institutional, faith in institutions crumbling, and that. And the real response in times like this is to build, to create anew, not to create things that are perfect. I mean, I'll be the first person to say that it's impossible to create a perfect institution, but to create an institution that's ambitious. Ambitious not only in terms of its principles, what it represents, but in terms of thinking about the variety of challenges that face higher education and how to confront them. And in building a university that takes those challenges seriously and finds adaptive and creative ways to overcome some of the challenges higher ed faces, then we make it possible for broader systemic change. And there's no way a single institution could possibly be the catalyst for all the change that we need across something as vast as the universe of higher education. But it's, I think it is a pebble in a pond, and I think there are ripples. I'll give you an example. I mean, people often think of UATX as being associated with, what I would say call intellectual pluralism or civil discourse, and that. And those are first principles that we think are essential and that have to be retained and preserved in higher education. But we're just as concerned with the financial model in higher education.
Right.
And also with the kind of curricular stasis of higher education. The fact that we really haven't thought deeply about changing the model in higher education in over a century. And so these are things, when you have a new university, a new sandbox, you're really trying to come up with creative ways to move in the right direction on many different fronts.
So when you talk about building good things, There's an idea from the theory of social change that I find really interesting. And in some models, people say there are two different ways to think about social change. You can fight bad things, or you can build good ones.
Yeah.
Those aren't exclusive. Maybe by fighting bad things, you make space for good ones. Maybe by building good ones, you along the way help to critique against some of the bad ones. But it seems like you guys are really, in a clear way, throwing your hat in the ring, in the arena, for building something good.
Absolutely.
That's your ambition.
Look, you can't build an institution to be against things. You have to build an institution to be for things. You have to build a university that has, directionality, a telos, a mission. You have to know what it is that you're trying to accomplish, and you have to know what it is that you're going to inspire people, so that they can follow you. And yes, you read sort of the initial statement that went out, and I was a little riled up at that point. I'm not going to lie,
adrenaline. It was adrenaline.
Yeah, it kind of was. Look, it was.
I'm sure. Of course.
Look, so you said, you don't necessarily act against bad things. You want to create good things. I don't think higher education is a bad thing. In fact, I think higher education is one of the most excellent things that civilization has ever produced.
You've been a president of one of the most illustrious colleges in our country, a place where I was a student. So
I've spent my entire life in education in one form or another, and my entire career in higher education. And I've been, incredibly blessed to go from, I was a first-gen college student. My parents were from Greece. I was the first one in my family ever to go to college.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and in one generation, we go from first-gen college student to having the privilege of being a college president and starting a university.
It's amazing.
Higher ed makes that possible. I love higher education. I really do. And so that's what gets you riled up when you sort of feel like, that's something that you love so dearly is not living up to its sort of best self. So that was that moment, but I realized really quickly after that, I'm like, when you said, are we in the arena? I don't want to be in that arena. I don't want to fight culture wars. I don't want to be, against the institutional higher education. We just want to create something that strives for excellence and that perhaps models a kind of, institution that others can follow and asks questions, and we'll try our best to get as many things right as possible.
So that, when I asked about you being the man in the arena or the institution in the arena, I think I was sort of partly thinking, I was thinking mainly about the idea of the human experience, being out there trying something new, no matter what it is, even in a nonpartisan effort. People criticize it, and that's what Roosevelt's talking about. But there is the other sense of that I think you're picking up on, that's that this question of whether UATX is a new partisan in the culture wars, because it stands up for a certain set of values about objectivity and a belief in a certain conception of truth, or maybe a belief in truth itself as a kind of a premise.
Yeah.
Or is Austin aiming to be outside the culture wars because it's a place where maybe the only place where genuine conversations about all these questions can be had in an open-minded way? There's sort of a fine question that I probably didn't get quite right.
No, but I really understand the heart of it, and because this is something I think we also struggle with and think about. When we went public, we said, we're a university dedicated to the fearless pursuit of truth.
Yes. People worried.
like, what does that mean, right? And it depends on where you put the accent. Right?
Good. Good.
It's pursuit. I mean, that's where the accent goes, right? Pursuit of truth, not the pursuit of big T truth that somehow we were sort of 99% of the way there and we're going to drag everybody with us. I mean, I guess I have a very difficult time understanding how the institution of higher education can work without having as an ambition the pursuit of truth. I don't understand what the enterprise is for. On the one hand, and I think this is maybe part of the schizophrenia we see in contemporary modern higher education, which becomes manifest to some degree at almost every institution. On the one hand, you have like this sort of commitment, or this, if it's not a commitment, at least an inclination towards relativism, right? There's just no such thing as truth. Like, there's this truth, that truth, et cetera. We just can't pin anything down. It's mercurial. And it's naive or foolish to think you can do that. So you have relativism on one side, and on the other hand, you have what I would just call ideology. Ideology is a totalizing set of explanations for the world, a fixed truth.
Right.
And the truth is, or what seems right to me, is that most universities hold both of those positions at the same time, and they're irreconcilable. And it creates a kind of schizophrenic kind of pathology. And so I think what our goal is to sail between the Scylla of relativism and the Charybdis of ideology, to aim for truth without claiming that we have it, or that even most things that are discernible, through the human intellect are attainable in terms of truth claims, by us. But that's what you do. You're holding on to an idea of truth as a goal, but you can't lock into ideologies.
Nice. I mean, I would say that, so the fearless pursuit of truth, some people hear that, and they think of truth. Some of my postmodernist friends in the academy, they hear truth as a dog whistle, but maybe knowledge. They feel there's pursuit of knowledge. Understanding.
I think all of those all those words
be.
are cognate. I think that's right. I'm kind of over the idea of dog whistles, because suddenly everything's a dog whistle. You can't just sort of use language anymore.
Good.
And I do think it's important to find, and this is something I push our team to do all the time, like, in order to not sort of get entangled in culture wars or those sort of issues, in order to show that we actually are, let's say, nonpartisan, postpartisan, transpartisan, or whatever it is, I don't know, whatever that is, I think what we have to do is not lapse into the terms that are charged, the ones we use over and over again.
Good.
And not because they're not accurate, but because they've been sort of occupied. So I think a great example, and I'm sure this is something that you all think about in the HXA context, is intellectual diversity. Now, apparently intellectual diversity is a dog whistle, right?
Absolutely. So
it's like, but you sort of think about it, you're like, okay, how, what's wrong with this? And I'm like, okay, fine. That term's been occupied. So how do we express what we mean in our own framework? And so we use, for example, the word intellectual pluralism, which I think is, close, it's massively overlapping with intellectual diversity,
right,
but has maybe just a different tonality.
Pluralism sounds inclusive.
It will become a dog whistle, I guarantee you, at some point.
No doubt.
And that's this kind of creeping effect of,
as a result of this podcast.
We've just canceled the term intellectual pluralism. We're never going to be able to use it again. But I think it's important, and I actually think that's, again, as I said, we've learned things along the way. I think standing up and meeting that challenge is important. Like, how do we keep our ideas fresh?
Yes.
And keep ourselves honest in the process. If we just lapse into language that is kind of denuded, and it becomes unhelpful, and then we can be, I think, charged with being, using language in a kind of blockish political way.
What really struck me, I remember when I first read the idea of the fearless pursuit of truth. I'm interested that you put emphasis on pursuit.
Yeah.
Which I understand. For me, the word fearless is what really struck me. The idea that people are going to pursue understanding in all different kinds of ways. That'll be unsettling, that'll take some courage sometimes to ask the question and to hear it in an open-minded way. So I just thought that for me, that was kind of what I think the slogan stirred a lot of people, probably in different ways, positively and negatively. But even the positive people who are on general stir positively, they may have picked out different words on that.
That's right. Oh, entirely.
to sort of work themselves.
Entirely. No, I think you're right about fearless. I think fearless is kind of a hinge term as well. I mean, on the one hand, it refers to our posture as we seek truth, like to be courageous ourselves, so that we, are sort of, willing to go places that, are.
Are you going to say no man has gone before?
Are terrifying, right? Intellectually. I mean, trying to pull ourselves out of a cave. On the other hand, we think universities should be a place where one shouldn't fear pursuing the truth. In other words, the kind of consequences that come with the pursuit of truth, should be mitigated in university. So if you're let's say, you're unorthodox, you're heterodox, you want to put out opinions that push against the system, a university should be a place that incentivizes and welcomes that, and doesn't, doesn't create anxiety around that. I mean, I often say universities as the places where orthodoxy and heterodoxy should come together.
Right. Good. One of the lines that you had in that essay that really struck me, you said that the universities are the places where society does its thinking. And it made me just think back to the Platonic ideal from 387 BC, Plato's Academy. That's the founding year. And the idea of a place in a grove outside of the city where people leave behind oikos, the economic things, they leave behind politikos, the political things, and they go to a place to do something else, to search for the truth. And that idea that the university is a place separated from ordinary run of politics, that's partly what's so radical about the Austin ideal and what stirred so much fervor, because many people believe universities have long been and should continue being the central sites of political conflict.
Yeah.
And so it's hard to, it's just the very announcement that you're going to separate to create a grove, to remove yourselves to a grove in Austin.
Yeah.
I think that's partly what stirred some of those concerns.
Well, look, I think,
or that reaction, I should say.
I think universities should be places where politics are studied, but politics should not be the operating system of a university. Because I think ultimately, if politics dominate institutions of higher learning, it compromises the pursuit of knowledge, the pursuit of truth. It reshuffles the priorities of the institution in a way that don't allow for what's needed, which is look, I think one of the reasons we have universities as places set apart is to give ourselves some distance from the quotidian, some distance from the fog of everyday life,
right? So
that we can better understand ourselves.
Right.
Not so that we're removed from it, but that we have enough of a remove so that when we engage with life, we have clearer sight, we have a clearer understanding of what's propelling us forward. And we don't have many places where we can do that.
Right.
One thing I often think about universities as places where we do our thinking, it's a particular kind of thinking. It's thinking over time. So universities are institutions in the sense that they're meant to stretch, beyond a particular moment in time, both institutionally, I think, and academically. So universities are where we think over time together.
Nice.
And a contrast to that, for example, would be journalism or media, where we think or we consider the world in a perpetual present, right? The job of a journalist in the media is you sort of live in this kind of perpetual present that's constantly shifting, and you're trying to understand that moment. It's fine. Everything you say is provisional. You can be wrong 6 months later. That's okay. And then I think there's actually a different kind of knowledge that we seek, and I would say through sacred institutions, it's about knowledge outside of time. Mm-hmm. And so universities have a particular place in the strata of knowledge seeking, and it's stretching the through line of human experience and thought as long and far as possible gives us purchase on who we are right now.
That's lovely. That's beautifully expressed. I'll just express an idea less eloquently that just to share it with you. I think part of the engine or part of the fuel that drives the political partisans on college campuses is to do with time as well. It's their claims for the urgency of their cause. So they say, students sometimes say, we don't have time to pause and have a considered conversation about this. The planet's dying right now, or racism is killing people right now, and we just need to act on this politically because there's no time for thinking. And they see people who call on the university campuses for pause, for reflection, for hearing the other side, for stepping outside your shoes and into their shoes. They hear all of that call for time, for taking one's time. They hear all that as a kind of a disloyalty or a lack of solidarity. So there's something interesting about that. Yeah. There's a politics goes with being in a rush on the campus, perhaps.
I think that's right. I think that's right. And I think campuses, Look, it's fine for students to be politically engaged and active, and for anybody, faculty and that, to have that sense of urgency about their cause. I mean, I think that's right. But I think the institution has to kind of be in the habit of slowing things down for the greater good, because we can rush into things, responsibly or irresponsibly. I mean, there's
we can rush into things responsibly or irresponsibly. Nice.
Reflection is never a bad thing. Self-reflection is, in fact, I think, a human obligation. And when we find ourselves not being self-reflective, I think we're not being fully human, and I think that's a problem.
Socrates says, "Know thyself."
Exactly.
That takes a little bit of time to do, and some courage too. Let's talk about UATX and the ideal, the curriculum that you're developing there. One place I remember hearing you say that the Austin curriculum will be the first that combines instruction from great teachers with instruction also from society's great doers.
Yeah.
So there's something interesting going on at Austin in that way. Can you just tell us about the curriculum and how you're imagining it and how it looks to you now?
One of the fun things about building an institution from the ground
up. Look at you smiling.
I love this stuff, is that you really, it is a sandbox. You sort of get to build something. You sort of have a set of challenges that you're trying to meet, and you get to build something, custom made, bespoke. And so the way we've approached the curriculum is, from the starting point that universities are places where theoretical knowledge, philosophical inquiry, diving into great questions are essential, but as kind of predicates to living and doing things in the world. So that's they are components of human flourishing. So how do you build a curriculum that allows us to spend as much time with thought as we might preparing for action?
Good.
Words and deeds. And so, we took, one thing that's kind of always frustrated me being at universities is we have this 4-year block, right? Universities are mandated to be essentially 120 credit delivery systems. And yet, for the most part, we don't really think about the shape of an education during those 4 years, or we don't think about the sequence very carefully. We don't think about how the parts fit together. So, the average student goes to a university and they have a set of general education requirements they have to fulfill, and it's just, it's a buffet, and most choices are, I don't want to get up at 9 a.m, so I'm going to take this class. And that was my experience. I was a radically irresponsible college student. I was a terrible college student. And so you just kind of take a assortment. Then you have something called a major, and the major's a little more organized than that. But majors are kind of a small part of what you actually do, over those 120 credits. And by the end of it, you're like, okay, could we have organized things in a way where the parts would add up to something greater? So that's part of our challenge. So, thought in action, being more purposeful. So what we've done is we have a curriculum, I'd say, that has 3 basic components. For the first 2 years, students are engaged mostly in what we call the Intellectual Foundations program.
Right.
And this is a program, it's a liberal arts-centered program, which means it's prismatic. You're drawing on all different fields of knowledge, literature, philosophy, history, mathematics, the sciences, thinking about great human questions. And all the courses are designed to interlock with each other and be sequenced. So all the students take the same courses in the same order together. The idea, the sort of organizing principle behind Intellectual Foundations is, the way I would put it, sort of the genealogy of modernity. Like, how did we get where we are today? What are the major thought currents? Where have we encountered, differences and philosophical differences over time? What ideas have been productive or destructive? What have we decided matters? What have we left behind? These sorts of things. So big picture, genealogy of modernity, so that we can understand who we are in the moment. So now we know we can best determine how to act in the moment. So that's the sort of first part of the experience.
And that's a 2-year program.
2-year program.
It's sort of a foundations. Intellectual history, might say.
It's our version of the general education program. So it's all encompassing, all the credits you take in a general ed program, but instead of being, sort of detached from one another, they're synthesized into this larger purpose of helping us understand where humans have come from and where we are.
Forgive me, but I'm surprised you said it's like a GED program. I would have thought
General Ed.
General Ed, sorry.
Yeah.
Forgive me. I thought you would say it's like the St. John's College program, but includes the 20th century.
Well, it is. The St. John's College DNA is built into this as well. I mean, the kind of idea that the way that we think about, let's say interrogating human knowledge is by, reading books that have been speaking to each other for a very long time and taking each of those books on its own terms very seriously.
But including contemporary texts.
But it does, yes.
I'm thinking of the Straussian charge. There's going to be a lot of
the
Theaetetus and all the obscure dialogues, or Ptolemy for 2 months and so forth.
At St. John's, there was almost nothing that was read after the mid 20th century, and that was purposeful.
Right, I remember.
And I think that was sort of bound with the idea that what you read at St. John's are great books, and so there's you need a kind of marinating time to determine whether something's great. That's not necessarily, we're not fully committed to great books in the same way, although many of the things we read would be considered great books. So it's not a great books education. I'd say it's a liberal education that we're offering, which is a little bit different.
So it include economics?
Oh, of course, yeah. So some of the things, social, sort of fields of social science,
which are recent phenomenons. Last 100 years?
Yeah, for the most part. It depends on
how you count Tocqueville.
Or Adam Smith or something.
Okay, fair enough. Let's not start.
but that's the first part. So really just kind of grounding. And one thing we've taken from St. John's, which I think is invaluable, is that students have a common intellectual journey.
Right.
So all the students are kind of in the same classes, reading the same text at the same time. So this opens up the classroom. It means that the classroom isn't the only place where you think together, but you think together, when you're having meals or, you're at the bus stop or whatever, all the ideas from the class are kind of constantly ricocheting around.
Nice.
And I think that's very important. I think it's a gift that we've taken from St. John's.
I don't want to wax poetic about my experience at St. John's College, but I'll never forget Thursday nights after seminar, retiring to the Great Hall, and there'd be all these people sitting around talking about the same set of readings. And you could talk to an upperclassman who'd read the Odysseus, 2 years before, and they know all the things you know too. And it's a fascinating having community of that way, kind of a shared set of puzzles that you're pondering together. If they're well-chosen puzzles, it's a remarkable experience.
It is, and it really it's a kind of intellectual force multiplier. Because
That's right.
So again, like you say, you can speak across classes.
That's right.
Alumni have read most of the same books that the current students. It's just, and the faculty are all teaching those books, so it's great. So that's the first 2 years at UATX, and then we move in kind of a different mode. So rather than traditional academic departments that are primarily oriented towards academic scholarship, we've created what we call academic centers of inquiry that are meant to be the meeting place of scholarship and, let's say, practical application in the world. So our faculty in the centers may be a sort of, traditional, classicist, doing work on the Theaetetus, or they might be somebody who's a computer engineer who's thinking deeply about the relationship of the classical languages to, or the development to modern language and that. And yet they're sort of combined in the same centers. And students will then, after they leave the Intellectual Foundations program, rather than have a major, they become a junior fellow at one of these centers. And then they're sort of integrated into the work that the faculty and practitioners are engaged in.
And these centers are all interdisciplinary centers?
They're broadly disciplinary. So we're still playing around with the kind of, let's say, shape of these. So we have one that's the Center for Economics, Politics, and History, Center for Arts and Letters, STEM. As we grow over time and we have more programs, these will be broken into different kinds of units. We're going to play with different combinations. But the idea is that each center, rather than being a silo, is an overlapping circle.
Interesting.
So that faculty will often jump back and forth between the centers, courses are cross-listed. So there's a kind of fluidity. You need something of a core, right? You need something that kind of stabilizes the pursuit of knowledge. So each center has its kind of foundations core, but then you need to incentivize people to think about the connections between education and and computer science, or mathematics and politics and these sorts of things. So, so we're trying to have fields of knowledge that have kind of fluidity while still maintaining some disciplinarity. So students will do that. And then the third component of the UATX curriculum is radically distinctive, I think.
Is this Polaris?
It's what we call our Polaris project.
Tell us about it.
So our symbol, other schools have like mascots of like, badgers and lions and all those things. Our symbol is the North Star. Okay. And again, this goes with the pursuit of truth. The North Star is out there. We're never going to get to the North Star, but it gives us direction.
Right.
It gives us something to aim for. And it helps us navigate through darkness, through ignorance. So every student has a Polaris project. And the purpose of this project is from the moment they get on campus, they become part of this kind of integrated, systematic program that helps them do vocational discernment, personal discernment in the early stages, trying to identify like what's a student's greatest gifts and how do you match those gifts with the world's greatest need. And then once you have that kind of, those things start to come together, we want students to design a project that is extremely ambitious, kind of, let's call it an entrepreneurial project. Although it doesn't have to be business or tech, it could be an arts project, it could be anything that is going to try to bring their gifts to the world's greatest need. And so
try to bring their gifts to the world's greatest needs.
Yes. And I'll give you an example. I use this one all the time. It's my favorite one. I was talking to a young man and we're talking about the Polaris project, prospective student. And I said, well, look, you're going to have to do this 4-year-long project. And it's going to be highly structured, mentored. We're going to teach you how to plan for it and resource in that. But it has to be something really important. And it has to have some kind of significant impact. And I said, so what's your passion? Like, where would we start? He's like, well, I love the ancient world. So I love Greece and Rome. I love classical language and all that. I said, this is going to be tough. Like, and so we thought about it for a bit. And I said, well, how would you take that passion and extend it as broadly as you could to others? And he said, I read recently that there are fewer than 100,000 people who know how to read ancient Greek.
Is that true?
It's what he said. It may have been in the US or something like that, but it was whatever the data point was. I said, okay. He said, I want to teach 100,000 more people how to read ancient Greek.
Wow.
And I thought,
interesting.
What a great project. Like, think about everything that goes into that.
Right.
I mean, it is about
everything, like deciding, okay, what's the delivery mechanism? What's the institution? How do I fund it? That kind of thing.
How do I fund it? How do I teach it?
How do you motivate it?
Motivate it? Like, is it technologically based? Whatever it is. What's the time frame? Is there a business plan? So so we see ourselves.
When do you start? That's interesting, right? I can see immediately all the questions, right? When do you start? How do you find them?
How do you find them? And
how do you know when they know?
How do you measure? Right? All these things, right? And so wrapping your mind around that, but having 4 years so that it's essentially running through the entire length of your undergraduate education. So
so Polaris is concurrent with these other phases.
So it runs through the other phases. So that in the beginning, when you're still sort of mulling over the project, you're going through, let's say, the more philosophical phase of your education. So you're thinking about what's important to humanity, what's important to me, what are these questions we need to answer. But then you start to learn how to practically apply the knowledge that you've gained along the way as you move forward. So it's a very different model for education.
Can I just say something about what really strikes me about that? It's really interesting. But I think, one of the great dangers, I think, presented by our current educational system is the conformity that people in high school feel they need to accept for themselves to meet certain standards of certain criteria so that they can get in.
Yeah.
And there's this thing within every individual, the person you are, the unique individual that we each are. And it just strikes me, thinking about this now, the way you described it, that, you might say, well, having an 18-year-old as a freshman and trying to decide what's their project going to be for 4 years it's too early to do that. On the other hand, though, you might say, that thing you love, attend to that.
Yeah.
That little thing that they didn't care about in the admissions program when you try to apply to Harvard or whatever, or Brown, or whatever it might be. That thing that, whatever it might be, right? Yeah. Something about the guitar, something about poverty, something about Greek.
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
And
it says pause and say, what do you uniquely?
And insisting that your education is meant to serve that, meant to serve you. Right. So in high school, I have high school kids now, and thinking about college and that there's so much pressure as you were saying, not to be themselves, but to be the ideal candidate for something.
That's right.
And
it's sad. It's sad to watch.
It is. And I think this is one of the reasons why students, when they get to university, are sort of depleted. Like they don't know what, okay, I'm here now.
That's right.
Everything I've done has been oriented to like crossing the threshold. How do I find myself? And that's one of the things we want to do is be like, you're here now. The important stuff starts now.
That's right.
Let's start mining you. Right. So it doesn't, it's not about checking boxes for a major. It's not about checking requirements. It's like, it's about coming out of this with a deeper understanding of yourself, your capabilities, your ambitions, and the challenges that you'll face. So look, I have no doubt that a significant portion of these Polaris projects will not be completed by the time a student leaves. They'll maybe get 20% of the way. That doesn't matter. It's, again, the directionality, the inspiration, that kind of North Star that gives you something to seek moving towards that's important. And what you discover along the way is your education. That's what your education is.
I wonder if there's a connection between that aspect of the program, that Polaris element, and UATX's basic idea about being a place for free thinking. And one way I'll say that is that, this is a hypothesis, not well formed, but I'll just share it. We can do with it what we want. I wonder if that competitive process of admissions preparation in high school that most people go through softens them up for the conformity that we see on many campuses, because they haven't had a chance to individuate. I went to a play recently, Prometheus Bound. And there's this wonderful line early in Prometheus Bound where strength and violence are taking Hephaestus out to tie Prometheus to the rock. And Hephaestus says to strength and violence, kratos ibia, in you the will of Zeus finds its perfect fulfillment, for in you there's nothing to stand in its way. They simply are strength and their violence. There's no individuation at all. So when there's a powerful force of authority saying, do this thing, there was no one there within strength or violence to say, but what about me? What about my love of that? Is it wrong for me to? I'm not sure about that, but it's interesting that
absolutely
maybe there's some connection between that individuation and freedom of thinking.
Look, what are we teaching students through the process of preparing them for application to universities? We're teaching them that success is predicated upon conformity and submission.
That's exactly what I meant.
Right.
Much better.
That's what we're teaching them.
That's what I worry about.
And then they get to universities and they carry that lesson with them. And so here we are, let's say you take the elite universities in the U.S., which have, the ability to attract, the best and brightest students from around the world who come with so much innate potential to be independent thinkers and creative in that. And yet what they learn is that the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, at the end of this experience, is accessible only if you conform, if you submit to, what the institution is compelling you to do.
Right. Right.
And I think, that's why in the classroom, for example, students are so risk averse when it comes to conversation, because what they've learned is it's the purpose of seeking an education isn't about taking risk. It's about mitigating risk.
It's fascinating. It's fascinating.
You're not going to get into, your top choice university by taking risks. You're going to get in there by shaping yourself in a way that enhances your percentage chance to get over the threshold.
It's fascinating.
And the funny thing is, you have to pretend like you're a risk taker along the way. Like you have to start, a snowball company or whatever it is. And these are all marketable, but they're also predictable. That in fact, it's a kind of, it's independence wrapped in conformity.
I asked you before whether your aim was to build one great free thinking college or to disrupt the whole system, which I'm aware is kind of a loaded question. In that, but I want to return to it in a specific way. I'm interested in governance, in your governance structures. I was fortunate enough to attend two summits you've held on the grounds of UATX, the future grounds of UATX. And I was really struck last year with some conversations I had with Neil Ferguson about governance structures, and especially this idea that was still, I think, in its early phases about a judicial body of some sort that would be of the university but separate from it to protect some of the basic rights. Can you tell us about that idea?
Yeah.
Is that still happening? What's happened?
It's now constitutionally mandated. I mean, we've
nice.
passed our constitution, which includes that.
Fabulous. So interesting. Tell us about that.
Again, it's, trying to unpack some of the puzzles that we currently have in higher education. Like, academic freedom is essential to, a vibrant intellectual institution. Yet the kind of mechanism that we have for academic freedom today is highly compromised at most universities. The main mechanism is this thing we call tenure. All right. On the one end, we're discovering that tenure actually doesn't protect you anymore if you are seen to be transgressive in the wrong ways. And on the other hand, the whole system of tenure is, it involves tenured faculty hand selecting their colleagues and hiring them and kind of running them through a 6-year gauntlet and then deciding if they're going to get tenure. So academic freedom might be achieved for those who have gained tenure, but at the front end,
right,
heterodox scholars, other thinking people are never allowed in the door.
Right.
So we are completely, the aperture is so narrow that the people who are hired and then who progress and get tenure are, it's a relatively narrow band of people. And look, I wouldn't want to overstate that. I don't mean to say that there's sort of this cabal of tenured faculty at every institution who are purposefully trying to exclude people who disagree with them. But I just think that's been what we've seen transpire over time.
And I'll just have my own experience as a graduate student at Oxford in philosophy and political philosophy. I was very well aware early on which one of the great minds and that my mentors would want to work with me because of my unorthodox political views and which ones didn't. Mm-hmm. And I was fortunate to have a Marxist professor, G.A. Cohen, who was really interested in free markets and wanted to talk to someone who was really serious about that. Yeah. So I found some, but I was very aware that other luminaries might not take me under their wing, actually wouldn't take me under their wing, even if they would find me an interesting person in some other way. So there's a long, again, we shouldn't overstate it, but there is this long process of surveillance or checking through graduate school, through tenure, and then it comes to the other side. But back on the governance structure.
So back to that. So like I said, the main mechanism for the preservation of academic freedom institutions is tenure. It's not working, or not working as well as it should. So we thought, we sort of looked to the American founding. We're thinking about systems of checks and balances, and we quite literally, our founding documents for the university are a constitution structured in a similar way. And it was Neil Ferguson who came up with the original idea of, thinking about academic freedom and the mission of the university being protected by a judicial branch, right? So if you've articulated your mission and the principles of academic freedom constitutionally, then you need constitutional protections. You need some branch some branch in your kind of governance order that can adjudicate issues that come up. So what we have in our Constitution is we got to come up with a better name because it's almost impossible to say. Adjudicative Council.
You need a better word.
We need a better word. We need something a little sexier than that.
Adjudicative.
Just Supreme Court sound. Again, we're always trying to find new ways. Adjudicative Council that's going to be composed of people who are not part directly of the UATX community, but who have some standing or quality that would qualify them to be part of this. They could constitutional scholars, experienced administrators, academics, whatever it is. And, sort of on a, volunteer basis, they form a council so that if anybody, faculty, student, member of the staff, feels at any point that their academic freedom has been impinged upon, or that we are acting in a way that's counter to the principles embedded in our Constitution, they can bring the case before the council, and their determination is binding upon the university. So, if there's a scholar, let's say, who's up for contract renewal or something, and feels that he or she has, their contract hasn't been renewed because the university is uncomfortable with what they were teaching or what they said on a podcast or what they wrote somewhere, they would bring that before the council, and the council would judge. And again, this council's only objective is to objectively, interpret what we've put in our own documents and hold us accountable. It's also a way that we're going to stay true to our mission, because the question I get all the time, John, is that, this is great. You're coming up with these, you're renewing these important principles in higher education. But if we see slippage at other institutions, how are you not going to kind of, fall away from your originary principles? And so having this judicial branch that will hold us accountable. So, let's say the board does something that seems to be counter to the principles that the institution's upholding. A student can bring a case before this council, and then the board is bound by that.
It's fascinating, and the president would be bound too.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
Absolutely.
So if I can just say this is when I think about what you're doing and some of the innovations that you're coming up with, that's the one that strikes me most potentially radically disruptive.
Yeah.
And there's this idea, as we both know from early America, the American founding, there was an idea before the Constitution was written that, as Gordon Wood puts it, that the liberty of the many will be protected by the virtue of the few. The idea is we'll have a society where virtue will govern us. But then the founders realized virtue won't last very long without institutional structures. Right. And what really strikes me about that idea from Austin about moving to a separation of power institutional structure that's where intellectual freedom is protected institutionally, is that it throws into contrast, it throws into a new light all the existing universities in a country. Because what it makes me realize is that at most universities, people are waiting for some virtuous president to arrive and be virtuous and remain virtuous, but fighting for free speech, having a university be a rough place of contention that's in the news all the time for all kinds of bad things, as opposed to bending to the usual pressures and conforming and tamping down controversy on the campus for survival and fundraising purposes. So it shows that Austin's model, to me, suggests that every university should maybe consider, or at least they all have this feature. They're relying on virtue solely, the virtue of the few, to protect liberty of the many. And our founders thought that was a worrying way of going about doing business. But I think almost every university in the country is based on that different model.
Yeah. Well, it's certainly self-evident to me that as a college president, that I'm insufficiently virtuous to uphold all the things that need to be upheld at a university. I mean, I strive for that, but I know my own vulnerabilities and weaknesses. And we all stumble in the execution of our duties.
Of course.
And so I actually find it comforting that there is, this body that will help me course correct if there's a mistake made. Because my ultimate allegiance is to the principles we're intended to uphold. I very well may get things wrong along the way.
Right.
My colleagues, it's reassuring to me to know that we have a kind of systemic way to check these things. And I think the only way to really uphold a mission in any organization over time is to be involved in persistent self-reflection. So this is why you mentioned the summits that we hold every year, the First Principles Summit. Every single year we hold a summit where we invite people from outside the university, you and others, people from within, and we're really meant to take a deep dive into
they're fascinating
are we
conversations.
Upholding our principles? Like, what are we doing? And if we're not, what do we need to do to course correct? Okay. And if this is part of your annual cycle, this is coming, and then you sort of, it causes you to reflect along the way about whether you're doing that. So these are the kind of things that we put in place. I'll give you another example that we're developing. So we are going to be surveying our students when they arrive at the university around issues related to intellectual freedom, civil discourse, et cetera, sort of take a kind of baseline survey and then survey them at the middle point of their time with us and the end point so that we can collect data, for example, on questions like, do you feel like you have the ability to speak with an open mind in a classroom? Do you feel how would you currently define what open inquiry is? How would you currently rate your commitment to robust civil discourse, and see what this is a way to measure our success as a university. When a student spends 4 years with us, are we getting better? Is their commitment to these principles becoming stronger?
Fascinating.
Are we fulfilling? You have to know. You have to constantly reflect and check along the way. Because if we're not fulfilling our mission, there's no point in being there.
So one of your ideas, one of your aims is to, one of the educational aims is to deepen people's commitment to thinking for themselves, making their case with evidence.
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
Oh, I mean,
it feels strange for me to say it's fascinating because you might think that that's the most obvious thing. You go to the university to learn about how many different views there are, how much you need to know, why it's important to use evidence, why you shouldn't just yell at each other, you should use argumentation and reason as best we're able. And yet it seems it's striking again that at Austin that becomes an innovation.
Yeah, I was going to say we have only 2 classroom rules. One is every opinion must be heard. Number 2 is every opinion must be backed up by evidence.
Right.
And you have to adhere to both of those.
Fascinating.
And that's fine. So you can't just say things. You have to provide your evidence, which allows other people to evaluate, the thing that you're claiming.
When you start and you get running, it seems to me you'll want to have a faculty of diverse ideological viewpoints. Can you say something about that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, again, we will have failed if we become monochromatic politically, ideologically. So we're really, really interested in selecting faculty who come to us with, the broadest range of perspectives. It's a difficult thing to achieve, right? Because you can't. I think it's unfair when you're going to hire someone to say, tell me what your politics are. Tell me what you believe. Do you believe in God or not? Not because I'm judging you, because we need one of each. Right. I mean, so it becomes difficult. And so trying to figure out how you create that, let's say mosaic is challenging. One of the ways I think to approach it is simply through the things you decide to teach, right? So the subjects that you're teaching and that, or, if they're sort of broad range, if you're teaching everything from, Adam Smith to Marx, you're going to attract people who are expert in both of those areas, let's say.
Right.
It is something that we, I said we're sort of learning and struggling. I don't think we've yet unlocked the key to that, like how you can just sort of spontaneously create intellectual pluralism.
Right.
But it's an intention.
Yeah, it's fascinating. We're almost out of time, so I'm going to move to the lightning round, I suppose. Will there be tenure?
No.
That's a decision.
Yep.
That was still up in the air to some degree when I was interesting.
No tenure.
5-year contracts, 3-year contracts, month by month.
5-year contracts in general, possibly 3 years for the first contract. 5-year contracts in general, renewable. The terms of the contract are set at the beginning. So as long as somebody fulfills their contract, you'll teach these classes and you sort of agree on what their work is going to be over that time. It could be a project, scholarship. As long as people are doing what they're meant to be doing, they're automatically renewed. But yeah, 5-year contracts for the most part.
It's and a big one. What about accreditation?
Yeah.
Do you need accreditation? What's happening with all that?
In the state of Texas, we have to seek accreditation. So that decision is taken out of our hands. The first step is what's called authorization, and that's where the state certifies you to be a degree-granting institution. So that's the stage that we're at now. You become authorized. Then you're a university. And then the accreditation process begins. Because accreditors, what they're doing is they're assessing it and operating university. You can't be accredited before you start. It's like a bond rating agency. You actually have to be operating, and then they assess you. And the sort of full process towards full accreditation takes anywhere between 5 and 7 years usually, but you have a kind of provisional accredited status during that time. So we are seeking it.
And why is accreditation important? Is it for student loans? Why is that such a big obstacle?
Yeah. So there are many things you can't do if you're not accredited, and this is, I think, part of the reason we don't have very many new universities is because of the hurdles put there. So students cannot have any federal loans, any Pell Grants, work study, federally backed loans until you're fully accredited. We can't even do things like we can't use .edu. We can't.
Interesting.
We can't go to these sort of these fairs for student recruitment. We can't, I mean, there's a whole host of things that you can't do until you're accredited. Yet you can't become accredited until you show that you can attract students and operate as a university. I mean, it's, this needs to be reformed. I'll just say that because it really dissuades new institutions from starting, which I think on the whole, the lack of heterogeneity in higher education is one of the issues that we have. New institutions will bring fresh blood. I understand that part of the reticence in making it too easy is schools have taken advantage of this. Maybe some of the for-profit institutions have, run roughshod over, their mission and that. But we have to find a way to reform this because we're going to get through accreditation. We have the resources, we have the momentum, but man, it's probably, one of the top 3 most difficult things we have to do.
It's fascinating. Pano, it's been such a pleasure having you on Heterodox Out Loud. Thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure. What a great pleasure to be here. And I just want to say for everybody who's listening, I mean, one of the reasons that UATX is UATX is because HXA is HXA. I mean, this institution as a kind of model for what we can do to support academic freedom and intellectual pluralism and the success of HXA has been inspirational to me personally and to everybody involved with our project. So I'm just thrilled to talk with you today.
Thank you. And from the inside, from the outside, from every direction, working to make good things, create good things in the world in a place where more open inquiry can happen. Pano, thank you.
My pleasure. Thanks, Sean.
Thank you for watching this episode of Heterodox Out Loud. Our aim, as always, is to give you an insider's view of the perils and possibilities for independent thinking, objective scholarship, and open inquiry in higher education. If you like this episode, don't be shy. Hit like below and subscribe. Also, consider subscribing to the Heterodox Out Loud podcast. If you work in higher education as a professor or an administrator, please visit the HXA website and join the thousands of people from all around the world who are working to support open inquiry. Until next time, I'm John Tomasi, reminding you that great minds do not always think alike.